All right, welcome. Oops, and I flipped the slide already. Welcome to the Braille Enhanced Story Walk. We're going to share our process today and then share some resources with you all and tips for possibly starting your own Braille Enhanced Story Walk. This webinar is being recorded for future sharing and distribution throughout the library world. So some of the information shared will be for the benefit of those institutions as well as the folks joining us today, and it can be adapted for however best works with your institution. And we will do Q&A at the end of this presentation. So I'll start. I am Cathy Lancaster. I'm the Youth Services Coordinator at the Library of Michigan, and this is my colleague Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Wambaugh, and I am the Youth and Outreach Librarian for the Braille and Talking Book Library in Michigan.
Thanks, Steph. All right, so I'm going to share today's slides in the chat as well for you. So if you're taking notes, as I know Kim said she was going to be taking notes, all the links and such will be in our slides as well as the chat box today. If I can get my screen to change. Okay, Stephanie's going to share with you how this all began.
Yeah, so we just wanted to give you guys a little background information. So the picture on the screen is the Michigan Library and Historical Center, and all three of the departments that collaborate on Braille Enhanced Story Walk in Michigan are housed in this building. So that's kind of how it came about. We have the Library of Michigan, who Cathy represents. We have the Braille and Talking Book Library, who I represent. And then also in this building is housed MDELIO, which is the Michigan Department of Education Low Incident Outreach. It's kind of like our School for the Blind. They send resources and teachers out to the public schools to help students with visual impairments. So essentially, I used to work on the Library of Michigan's LSTA, Library Services and Technology Act Committee, which provides statewide initiatives and competitive grants. And at some point, StoryWalk program came up, and of course, I work with Braille materials, so the project kind of just took on a life of its own from there. And suddenly, we had this inclusive and diverse program that lots of people were showing interest in. So it just goes to show that conversations like this and you being here today is an important first step to inclusive programming in your community. So thank you for being here. So today we're going to start by outlining our old process. We started this in 2017, and every year we've learned something new to where we've adapted and changed our process a little bit. As I mentioned, we're three separate statewide agencies that are collaborating to make Braille Enhanced Story Walks to distribute out to public libraries throughout Michigan. So we aren't making these to use them ourselves, and in a sense, we're mass producing them. So with that in mind, our process of creating a Braille Enhanced Story Walk may not be your process exactly, depending on your library situation. So the goal of this presentation is just to give you a jumping off point and provide some brainstorming and resources, and hopefully you'll be able to adapt that to fit your needs. So on this slide are the 5 basic steps of how we kind of did this project. I guess the first one is just collaborating, find someone that you can work with on this project. Then we would make the book selections. We would purchase those books as well as the Braille sticker sheets. And we do have a link later in the presentation to the exact product that we use for the embossing with the Braille sticker sheets. So that will be provided. Then we assemble them. So the Braille is embossed onto those sticker sheets. We laminate the project, we put it together, and we mail it out to the library's Free Matter for Blind. And the next slide actually has a video that kind of just summarizes this process. So let's go ahead and play that, Cathy. Welcome to our How-To Braille Enhanced StoryWalk video. The first step is finding the perfect books for your StoryWalk. Don't worry, we'll give you some tips on how to pick those out in a bit. Once you've purchased your books, you will need to debind them. Remember, it will take 2 books to create one StoryWalk since the pages are front-back. As you can see, the debinding process takes a little muscle. We recommend bending the book over the edge of the table and scoring the pages along the seam. When you are done, the page edges will be a little rough. Our partners have a handy machine to quickly and easily tidy up the edges. However, you can also use scissors to cut the edges straight. Once debound, the loose pages will need to be laminated. When you cut the pages out from the lamination, be sure to leave an edge all the way around. Do not cut right up against the page edge, or water and moisture will be able to get between the page and the lamination. We recommend at least a ½ inch of clear lamination around all sides. After the pages are laminated, it is time to attach the Braille. Our partners transcribe the Braille with a computer program and then print the Braille on a machine called an embosser. The Braille is printed on clear sticker sheets called Brailleables. After the entire Braille story has been printed, we cut the sticker down to size. Peel off the back from the sticker and affix it to the appropriate laminated page. Remember, Braille should only be affixed to one side of your two-sided page. If you are working with a partner on the Braille portion, be sure to communicate this need clearly. After all the Braille is affixed to the appropriate pages, the Braille Enhanced StoryWalk is complete. You are ready to either display this at your library or mail it out to your participating partner. These books can be mailed as free matter for the blind due to the Braille overlay. Welcome. All right, thank you, Cathy. So, as you can see, our final product then would be one StoryWalk that was laminated and brailled, like you just saw in that video. And again, that takes 2 books to do that. And then we would also send out to our public libraries, along with that Braille Enhanced StoryWalk, a copy of the book that was intact for the library to use for like story times or in-house programming. And then also step-by-step instruction guides for putting things together, tip sheets, and different tools. We'd also include an evaluation link, and that was required by our LSTA funding.
All right. So yes, and as Stephanie mentioned, this project is funded through the Library of Michigan, supported by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which I should have mentioned at the top. But here's some of our feedback. So our first year was 2017. We were able to send out Braille Enhanced StoryWalks to 25 libraries, and that included excuse me, that included our, that's included here in our slides. Sorry, my notes just messed me up, but these statistics and feedback is all available in today's slides. But what we found in 2017 was some splendid feedback. As you can see, Lions Club members responded. These locations of these 25 libraries served 1.7 million people. So it just really had a great reach within Michigan. And some of the feedback we got was also pretty supportive that the way we were doing it wasn't quite right yet. Basically, we were sending laminated Braille sheets and we paper clip them to the pages in the book. So excuse me, not laminated, unlaminated sheets of the book. So the video you just saw was what we came up with after 2017. And we'll talk about that here. So in 2018, we took that feedback and we were able to send laminated and already stickered Braille pages out to 32 libraries. And those 32 libraries met about 2.6 million people in Michigan. And we know that at least one horse showed up to view the StoryWalk because a mounted police officer came up and just loved the Braille Enhanced StoryWalk. So the second thing that we learned for 2018 was that there was a high demand for these Braille Enhanced StoryWalks. We filled up my inbox pretty quickly, and we realized that we were going to need to tweak how we did signups and start a form and not necessarily guarantee that those folks are going to receive a story walk. So in 2019, we were able to expand it to 35 Michigan libraries. And again, the service size for that was about 1.7. And we received some really wonderful feedback that year. But we also had a few more additional experiences. So in 2019, you know, by then we were laminating the books for them, but we had a guide on how to mount them. But some folks decided to take on their own creative ways to mount these StoryWalks. And what we learned from that is don't hole punch your StoryWalk and string it on a clothesline. It's not going to stick around in a thunderstorm. And this also then led us to learning that people were going to be requesting replacement pages. And that was difficult for request for us to meet. And then if we couldn't replace a page, that made the StoryWalk unusable for that library. So that made us think about changing how we did this and perhaps maybe circulating these StoryWalks in a different manner. However, as we headed into 2020, we were interrupted by the global pandemic, and there were so many fears about COVID. We didn't necessarily worry that this was a StoryWalk that would be outdoors, but what we worried about was it was Braille, and Braille has that heavy touch factor. So we didn't want to be encouraging families to all be touching the same materials at that time. So in 2021, we began to talk about bringing it back, and we had a set limited number that went out to advisory and outreach centers of Braille and talking book libraries across Michigan. So that was kind of our adventure in getting these out here. But in 2019, we had this wonderful feedback, and this is exactly why we do this program. And for whatever reason, I can't, there we go. I'm going to play you guys this feedback.
I love reading. It's a big hobby of mine, and not many people realize how important it is to have adapted Braille in the community so every blind person can read, because it's really hard to find Braille books that are, or books that are Braille, because there's not many books that are Braille in the sighted world. So thank you so much for this, and I really enjoyed it. I love reading. It's a big hobby.
So as you can see, this was Jules, and Jules is a visually impaired young lady who visited her local public library's Braille Enhanced StoryWalk, and she was so happy to have a Braille book as a StoryWalk that she made this video, and she really wanted to express how it's not something that everyone thinks about. And so for Jules, the impact was not just that she could read it, but that it was making others in her community realize, you know, how hard it might be for a visually impaired person to enjoy some of the same things. So it was very inclusive moment for her.
And I do think that, Cathy, sorry to interrupt, but I do think that's one of the ways we try to phrase this and promote this program, is that it's really about starting community conversations and disability awareness on a wider level. So yes, it's great that we're doing this project to provide Braille to those who read it, but it's also great for, you know, maybe a family walking along and a young child, and that's their first time that they've ever felt Braille, and then they ask their parents, you know, what is this? And then you're opening discussion into a whole new area. So I think it's a great way to phrase the importance of this project is just really focusing on those community conversations and disability awareness, you know, on large.
Yeah, wonderfully said, Steph. That's exactly right. And I think this slide here proves that point. So a librarian at Stair District Library sent this to us, and it was from their local newspaper. And she wrote me that the kids were so excited to find out what happened next that they ran to the next page. and that reading this book in such a new and unique context, with the Braille, and then of course the StoryWalk element of it, she said that really helped to spark interest and enthusiasm.
So I know we've kind of already touched on some of our challenges, and as we've mentioned, we changed the layout of our project each year, and we're actually embarking on a whole new way to do this, right, with the circulating kits, and we'll talk about that on the next couple of slides. But these are just some challenges that we faced that we want to make you aware of so that you're thinking of them if you're going to start Braille Enhanced StoryWalk in your state. So lamination was a big one. Make sure you leave at least a 1/2 inch around all the way around, because what we ran into is that some of our lamination was kind of cut crooked and there wasn't that barrier, and then water and moisture ended up getting into some of our pages, and then we couldn't easily replace those pages. So essentially the whole Braille Enhanced StoryWalk was kind of out of commission. And with so much, time and energy and money going into these, we want them to be long lasting. So just be careful of your lamination. Make sure you leave enough room around the edges. Another challenge we faced was the displaying. I know Cathy mentioned the one library who unfortunately tried to hang it on a clothesline. That led us to realize that not every library has the same resources, and some of them simply didn't have a good grasp of what would be the best way to display this. So what we took from that is, instead of saying, here's this free story walk for you to use in your community, good luck, we ended up creating instead kind of a checklist of like, this is what we expect of you, display it along a walking path, have it firmly affixed to signage, and kind of laying things out a little more clearly. And I think that helped greatly. Another challenge was the selection of books. We'll get to that a little bit later, so I'm not going to talk about that now. The last one was managing requests. When we first started this project in 2017, we just basically put Cathy's email out there and said, hey, email her, and her inbox got flooded and it didn't go well. And then some folks were angry because they missed the email by a couple hours, and then all the slots were full and they didn't get one, but they really wanted one. And we just found that that wasn't the best way to do it. So is what we are doing now is asking for libraries to apply. And it's a very short, simple application process. There's not a lot to it, but it actually gives us a little bit more control over who gets these as well. So for example, if a library that got one last year applied again, but there's some people who have never had one, we could then, instead of doing the first come, first serve, we could give it to that other library that hasn't had one yet. So it gave us a little bit more control over who got them, spreading them out throughout the whole state of Michigan, making sure that some urban, some rural libraries got them. So we would definitely recommend that application process over the first come, first serve model.
Right. And then that also led us to thinking differently because of the high demand of moving to a circulation of these, which we'll talk about here in just a second. So I guess I'll just kick it off with that.
Yeah,
that we are going to circulate them. We're getting so close to being done and ready. And we're going to use KitKeeper. This is what we use for NASA at My Library kits, if anybody has those at their state library. But KitKeeper is available also to public libraries, and it's basically a way to check in and check out these kits, and you can reserve them and send them out. So I would recommend that KitKeeper, especially if you're a state entity that is trying to ship them out to public libraries. Public libraries, like if you're going to do a Braille Enhanced StoryWalk, you could also possibly put it in your library of things and circulate it to the general public if they wanted perhaps a birthday party or something to have a Braille Enhanced StoryWalk at. So just a new idea right there. So they will be laminated. We're going to include the welcome sign. We're going to include a letter to the library, and we also have these reproducible materials. And I'm sorry, our screen, we meant to change the setting here. This might be a little hard to read, but the links here are for the reproducible materials. And then Stephanie had this great idea to add the alphabet cards, if you want to talk about those.
Yeah, so if you actually just want to go to the next slide, it shows a picture of it. But we decided that it would be great to include some more materials that would help public libraries in Michigan with some either passive programming or just generally programming ideas that could tie the Braille Enhanced Story Walk that is outdoors, outside their library, to programming that could happen inside the library. So the idea here would be to use the slate and stylus, which are those green ruler looking things there in the picture, along with the Braille alphabet cards to create a maybe like write your name in Braille station at the library, or do some sort of activity, whether it be passive or not, with people in the house. This could go along with story times or however the public library wanted to use it. So these will be included in all of the kits. And you can see a picture of the bin there that we're going to put the circulating materials into. In the top right-hand corner is a picture of the heavy-duty laminate. I believe we said, Cathy, that it was 10 millimeters. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, so it's very heavy duty. They'll be sturdy pages. And then is what we're also supplying is Velcro. And essentially the public libraries that will be circulating these kits to then will be in charge of providing the signage itself. So whether the public library wants to use wooden signs, whether they have a permanent StoryWalk installed and they're just gonna maybe Velcro these the StoryWalk onto their permanent signage, that end is up to them, but we'll provide the Velcro so that they'll be able to attach this to whatever signage they intend to use.
And I'll just add that the materials we're putting in this kit, much like NASA at my libraries, we made a spreadsheet so that if you wanted to just go ahead and outright duplicate that, it's available in the links to our slides today. And you can access like where we got the bin and the state stylists and all of that. So, all right. So as you can see, depending on what sort of capacity your organization has, there are two ways that you can best offer a Braille Enhanced StoryWalk. If you're a small public library, individual might be a little hard. You are going to need some community partners. You're going to need someone to help transcribe the Braille itself. So you're going to need to reach out to a partner. We're going to talk about some partners in a minute. But if you're a larger, let's say your state Braille and Talking Book library, or your community RESA, you can pretty much handle this maybe in-house on your own if you have all the equipment and the talent to produce a Braille Enhanced StoryWalk. So just a couple of pathways there. But now we want to show you some support and some resources.
So no matter which path you choose, whether you try this all on your own, or if you are gonna do this with some partners, these are some resources that might come in handy. So for one, the National Library Service for the Blind and Print Disabled, NLS, has a list of Braille transcribers that's linked in our slides, and it lists transcribers by state. Now, this is not a comprehensive list, but it could be a good place to start if you plan to purchase the Braille from a transcriber and do the rest in-house. So if your public libraries are asking how to do a Braille Enhanced StoryWalk, we wanted to get an idea of what that might cost for you guys, since we're not really using that route, and so we weren't sure. So I reached out to the very first transcriber listed on that NLS directory. It was in Alabama, I believe, and just ran the project by them to see what they would say. And they said most transcribers would be able to work with a public library to make this happen. You just have to make sure you clearly communicate your needs. So, 2 books make 1 StoryWalk. Braille only goes on one side of it. And they said it would cost about $5 per transcribed page. And remember, Braille transcription takes up a little bit more room on a page than regular print, so keep that in mind. But it should at least give you a ballpark estimate of the cost of this. And you just want to make sure you work closely with them. They'd probably have you pre-laminate the pages, and then you'd need to mark, which pages the Braille is needed on. Again, we use Brailleable stickers for this. That is also linked in the slide, so you can see the product that our partner LIO uses when they do the Braille. They have a very large, high-powered embosser because that's all they do all day is Braille, basically textbooks and stuff for children in Michigan public schools. So they have all the resources there to spit out Braille really quickly. So this is what they use, but there are some different versions depending on what what path you're going.
Right. Thanks, Stephanie.
Mhm.
And of course, we recommend that you look into finding a grant that might be able to support this. It's what, $5 a transcribed page for the Braille alone. And then the lamination, as we were looking into getting quotes to do the heavier laminate and not do it in-house, to do about 15 StoryWalks, it's over $1,000 to get that really heavy laminate in that time. And so definitely take a look at getting some grant funding for that.
And I will just say that originally we were doing the lamination in-house and it was just the thinner lamination and it wasn't that expensive. So it just depends if you're looking to maybe do what we originally did and make these more of like a giveaway thing or a one-use thing, or if you want it to be something that, stands the test of time. So that will definitely depend on which laminate route you go.
And actually, that just made me think of a question we do get often, or for people that have a permanent cased StoryWalk and they just want the Braille, you have to remember that that needs to go over the glass then, because it has to be touchable, and that can be a little hard to get off. We had that problem in 2017 where someone did take the laminated, not the laminated, but the Brailleables and put it over their glass permanent StoryWalk casing, and a hairdryer ended up helping heat that up and get that off. So it might be possible, but just keep that in mind. I would test it first for sure.
All right, so now potential partners. This will really just vary depending state by state. So we just kind of did a laundry list, honestly, here. You could reach out to your state library, similar to me working with Cathy. If you're a state librarian and you're like, who do I work with? I would maybe suggest looking for your my counterpart in your state, so an LBPH location through the National Library Service Network of libraries. Every state funding is different, so staffing levels will be different. I can't make any promises that these partnerships are going to work in your states, but it's a good first place to start because you guys have similar goals. You could also reach out to ISDs, RESAs, School for the Blinds, and then also keep in mind like Lions clubs or other local organizations as well, because they might even just be able to help with some funding or marketing or promotion type stuff as well.
Okay, so now for the fun part, we certainly don't want to imply that certain books are not appropriate for an entire population, but we have found some tips and tricks that might be helpful specifically for Braille enhanced StoryWalks. As you know, we have learned minimal text is probably best, because when you transcribe Braille, it can get quite long, but it also needs to overlay this picture book. So not having a very long text-filled picture book. And then if illustrations are used to tell the story, they don't include a description of what's actually happening on the page. So that's something that needs to be transcribed. And of course, words and sounds going across the page. So we're gonna go to the next slide here, if I can get my mouse to work. And Stephanie, you want to talk about this Jazzman?
Yeah, so we were really excited about this book. It was maybe the first or second year that we were doing StoryWalks, and we thought it'd be great because it went along with the summer reading theme of Libraries Rocked. And then our scriber got the book and he did it for us, but afterwards he was like, so this is the problem with this book. And it's not that he couldn't do it. I mean, he did it and it was a successful year with Braille Enhanced StoryWalk. But you see how the sound words kind of float down over the page on this picture? So that just causes a little bit of a hiccup for a Braille transcriber sometimes. So like if there's a word that crosses a centerfold, or with this one, it makes it difficult to know where to put the transcribing. So, you know, would he transcribe the two first sound words on the left-hand page and then the rest of the sound words underneath the text on the right-hand page? Or would he do it all on the right-hand page? But then somebody who doesn't read Braille sees words on the left-hand page and they're like, well, why is there no Braille on the left-hand page? So I'm getting very detailed with this, but it just goes to show that those are some things you should think about. So now when Cathy and I choose books, we try not to choose books that have words kind of crossing the page like that. So that was a tip we learned.
And then for a Universe of Stories summer, we used The Way Back Home. And it's a wonderful book, lots of descriptive text, but at the very end, you can see here, the end of the story is basically told in pictures. So that was a challenge because you have to transcribe what those pictures are showing. So, you know, he's getting this little package with the walkie-talkie, and out of the walkie-talkie, he hears hello after he's like walked away from it, but it's his little alien friend up in space. But that's a lot to convey in Braille when they visually cannot see these illustrations. So again, you know, try to avoid wordless picture books or a lot of heavy art reliance to tell a story. But we also want you to avoid heavy in text. And another thing we found was picture books that focus on colors. While it's not necessarily a problem, it can be a bit challenging for visibly impaired to hear about all these different colors. So we kind of have avoided that style as well.
And I will just chime in on this one that it ends up actually being more of an issue for sighted people than so the transcriber can easily transcribe that last picture, the Way Back Home picture, but it's that it takes a paragraph of text, which is a lot of Braille, and someone who's sighted is seeing that page and they're like, there's not that much text, like what's going on? So it just causes confusion because there's a paragraph of text when there's no text on that page.
Indeed.
So our last, in 2021, one of the last stories that we've picked that we've been very happy with, we got good feedback on it, and it seems to fit kind of all of our things, you know, all of the things that we've learned in the past, you know, 4 or 5 years, whatever it's been, is The Watermelon Seed. So this book had minimal text. The text did a very good job of describing the pictures. It kept to the spread. There wasn't any pages where like the words floated over the center line. And the color contrast of the text on the page was good. So I don't even necessarily think of this as just from you know, a blind perspective, but also those with low vision. Sometimes picture books will have poor color contrast. So the words themselves are on like a dark background or something. If they're dark words, you can't see that well. It makes it difficult to read. So this book kind of just highlighted all of the good things that we're looking for in a story walk. So this is one that went well for us.
And I will say that it's really important. Stephanie and I have bounced so many books off of each other to find someone to partner with and kind of imagine, how does this story sound? What are these little details? We've gotten very good, I think, at picking picture books. So The Watermelon Seed was definitely a highlight of like what works well for a Braille enhanced StoryWalk. So as mentioned, we do have these marketing tools for your use. We have a new Braille enhanced StoryWalk logo, flyers, tip sheets, social media graphics and texts, as well as sticker printouts. They're available for anyone to use. It's through the Institute of Museum and Library Services that we funded this. So of course, your state library entity is welcome to use that and to put your own stamp on these items. But we'd really love to see the Braille Enhanced StoryWalk logo get used nationally as well. So that's all available. I put the link in the chat there for you. And like I said, you can sub in for the Library of Michigan's logo. You can pop in your own state logo. Just keep the IMLS logo on those materials if you could. So additional ways to engage in Braille literacy, and we'd love to have a conversation here in a few minutes with you all about thoughts, ideas that have come to mind. And we kind of brainstormed a few here together. So one of the new things I've heard of libraries starting to do, and there's an article here on Niagara Falls Public Library in Ontario, that they put QR codes on their StoryWalks. And so then as a family went through, they could just open that QR code and it had a screen reader if it's a PDF, or it would have a recording that somebody could talk over. So those are a couple ways to use QR codes without having to use Braille necessarily. And then NASA at my library, if you are a state that offers that, they also have those tactile books. So like you can have the tactile surface of the moon, and perhaps using those in additional ways, or encouraging your public libraries to check NASA at my library kits out to use in tandem with their Braille Enhanced StoryWalk. What else did we want to talk about on here? Like I think we were thinking about some kits that might be STEAM and STEM related that were good for Braille, but also sensory. Lots of tactile options that you could circulate as well. And then, of course, encouraging libraries or offering them materials to supplement these programs. And then lastly, the final ABC signage bullet point there, that came from a librarian in Michigan who wrote us, and she said, gosh, it would have been great to have like an ABC sign at the start of the StoryWalk with all the letters, so that kids could pick like a letter to look for as they went through the StoryWalk, perhaps like the first letter of their name. And that's what inspired Stephanie to think of those ABC cards that we're going to be putting in the kit now, so that people that come to the StoryWalk can get an ABC card and know what the Braille represents as they
And I should note that I didn't say this earlier, I don't believe, but the card that was shown in the picture that we're going to include in the kit, those were provided to us by the National Library Service. That is something that if you were partnering with your LBPH in your state, they should be able to order. NLS did tell us we could use them for Braille Enhanced StoryWalk kits. They want them used up because they actually say their old name. So within the last couple of years, NLS changed from National Library Service for the blind and physically handicapped to print disabled at the end. So it actually has like their old information on it, and they're like, please use them. So we're actually getting those free. We're not having to pay for those with any sort of funding money. But if you're unable to get those, or if you're not working with the LBPH in your state, there are companies that sell them online for not a bad price. So I think one of them that I looked up was the American Printing House for the Blind, APH is what they go by. If you go to their website, you can order Braille alphabet cards. I think it was maybe like $10 or $12 for 100 of them.
All right, so as you can see, providing a Braille Enhanced StoryWalk is not quite as easy or a very quick process. You know, we've definitely fine-tuned this over the years, and we've received lots of questions how to implement one from various libraries in probably many of your states. And we want to take a few minutes here to talk with you guys, to answer any questions. You're welcome to put them in the chat or a mute. But we want it to take a moment, and I'm going to go ahead and just share our contact one more time here before I stop the screen share so that we can have our conversation. So feel free to reach out to Stephanie or I with any questions as you move forward with this, and we'll help you as best we can, but we hope we gave you a good idea of our process today.